She doesn't work here anymore. Seo-an stepped into the doorway. Leave. Oh Taejun smiled. I'm here for my wife. Your wife. Seo-an's jaw tightened. Interesting word for a man with two of them. The studio door opened behind him. Obioma froze. Both men turned. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Taejun's eyes moved between them, reading the space between her and Seo-an like a man who just understood something he didn't expect. How long? Taejun asked. Seo-an didn't answer but turned to Obioma instead. His dark eyes found hers across the room. Do you want him here? She had spent 7 years invisible to Taejun, the man standing in that doorway. And 8 weeks being completely seen by the one blocking it. No. He said it clearly. Seo-an turned back to his brother, Taejun. She said no. Chapter 1. 8 weeks earlier. The certificate was beneath his passport. Obioma found it at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday looking for the electricity bill. Oh Taejun was in the shower. She could hear him. The water running. Him humming something she had heard him hum 1,000 mornings in 7 years of marriage. He picked it up. Read it once. Read it again. The Korean was not perfect but she had been living in Seoul long enough. Long enough to understand a marriage date. Long enough to understand a bride's name. Lim Chi-rin married to Oh Taejun. 6 months after he married her. The paper did not shake in her hands. She noticed that. Her hands were completely still. Like her body understood something her brain was still catching up to. Like some part of her had been waiting for this piece of paper for a very long time and was not surprised to finally be holding it. The shower stopped. She put the certificate back exactly where she found it and closed the drawer. Stood in the middle of their bedroom and looked at the life around her. 7 years of it. His books on the shelves she had built. His family photographs on the walls she had painted. The architecture drafts she had given up when he said family first. When he said Seoul is expensive and 2 careers in this city is too much pressure. When he said you can always go back to it later and she had believed him the way she believed everything he said because he had never given her a reason not to. Later had become never so gradually she had not noticed the exact moment it happened. The bedroom door opened. Taejun came out toweling his hair. He saw her face and stopped. Not because he was concerned. Because he was calculating. He watched him do it. Watched his eyes move to the drawer behind her. Back to her face. Watched something settle in his expression that was not guilt. It was the composure of a man who had been waiting for this moment and had already prepared for it. That composure broke something open in her that the certificate alone had not. How long? Her voice came out completely even. Obi. How long is Taejun? He sat on the edge of the bed. Fully. Like he was settling in for a conversation he had rehearsed. It's complicated. It has a date on it. She kept her voice even. 6 months after our wedding. That is not complicated. That is a decision. Pi family. Don't. The word came out sharp. Don't tell me your family needed you to marry Korean. Don't tell me it was pressure and tradition and you had no choice. She took 1 step toward him. You had a choice every single morning for 6 years. You chose this every day. He looked at her. Something moved across his face. Not remorse. The closest thing to it a man like him could manage. Regret that he had been found out. Those were not the same thing. What do you want me to say? Nothing. She picked up her bag from the chair. I want you to say nothing. He stood. Obi, you can't just. Watch me. She walked out. Down the stairs. Through the front door. Into the Seoul morning that was cold and bright and completely indifferent to the fact that her life had just ended in a bedroom drawer. She had 40,000 won in her personal account. She discovered this sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the apartment she could not go back to. Her phone on the table. Her coffee going cold. 40,000 won and a work visa tied to Oh Taejun's sponsorship because he had suggested it 2 years ago and she had agreed because she agreed to everything he suggested and she had not understood until this morning what agreeing to everything looked like from the outside. It looked like nothing. It looked like a woman who had handed over every piece of herself one reasonable suggestion at a time until there was nothing left that was entirely hers. She opened her portfolio on her phone. 7 years old. The last work she had submitted before Taejun said family first. Structural designs. Interior concepts. 3 commendations from her final year at university. A professor's note that said this student sees space differently than anyone I have taught in 20 years. She looked at it for a long time. Then she opened every architecture firm website in Seoul and started sending emails. The rejections came fast. Some were polite. Most were not. One firm replied within an hour to say her portfolio was outdated and her Korean was insufficient for client-facing work. Another said they were not currently hiring international staff. A third did not reply at all but viewed her profile 17 times, which felt like its own specific cruelty. By the fourth day she was sleeping on the floor of her friend Adi's apartment in Mapo. Adi's, who had come to Seoul 2 years after Obioma and had built a life that was entirely her own. Who fed her jollof rice and did not ask questions and left job listings on the kitchen table every morning like offerings. It was Adi's who found the listing. Personal assistant to principal architect. Ryu Seo-an Design Group. Immediate start. Competitive salary. Korean language proficiency preferred, not required. You are an architect, not an assistant. Obioma said it to the listing. You are also currently sleeping on my floor. Adi's said it to her coffee. Apply. She applied. The interview lasted 11 minutes. Ryu Seo-an did not look up from his drafting table when she walked in. Did not offer her a seat. Did not introduce himself because apparently his name on the door was introduction enough. He asked 3 questions. Can you read structural drawings? Yes. Can you manage a schedule without being told the same thing twice? Yes. Do you have opinions about other people's work? He paused on that one. He looked up for the first time. His face was exactly what she had expected from his reputation. Precise. The face of a man who had decided long ago that warmth was an inefficiency. Dark eyes that assessed her with the same attention he probably gave load-bearing calculations. Finding the weakness. Identifying the risk. She met his gaze directly. Yes. He said it clearly. I have opinions. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Gone before she could identify it. Good. He looked back at his work. Come back tomorrow. 8 am. Don't be late. That was the interview. She stood in the corridor outside his office for a full 10 seconds afterward, trying to determine if she had gotten the job or been dismissed. She came back at 8 am. The first week was brutal. Ryu Seo-an worked like the concept of rest was a structural flaw in other people's designs. He arrived before her every morning. Left after her every night. Expected his schedule managed with precision she had to build systems for because his previous assistant had apparently managed everything in her head and left without documentation. He called her assistant for 3 days. On the 4th day she put a card on his desk with her name on it. He looked at it. Looked at her. Looked back at his drawings. Obioma. He said it precisely. Getting the syllables right on the first attempt in a way that surprised her. The Ngozi project file is missing 2 structural reports. Find them. He found them. He did not say thank you. She had not expected him to. What she had not expected was the work itself. Being inside this office. Surrounded by his designs on every wall. Structures that did something she had not seen buildings do in a long time. They breathed. They had negative space that was not empty but intentional. Buildings that understood what was not built was as important as what was. She found herself staying late. Not because he asked her to. Because the drafting table in the corner of the studio that nobody used was available after 7 p.m. And her hands remembered things her brain had been telling her she forgot. She drew quietly. After everyone left. Before Seo-an left, because Seo-an never left before midnight. She did not think about the certificate. Did not think about Taejun or Chai-rin or 40,000 won or 7 years of reasonable suggestions that had added up to nothing. She thought about load-bearing walls. About negative space. About the building she had designed in her final year that her professor had called the most instinctively human structure he had ever seen a student produce. He drew. On the 8th day Taejun called. She watched his name on the screen until it stopped ringing. He called again. She put the phone face down on the drafting table and kept drawing. Behind her across the studio she heard Seo-an's pen stop moving. She did not turn around. The phone rang a 3rd time. You can take it. Seo-an's voice came from across the studio. Even. Uninflected. I'm not paying you for your personal life. I know. She kept drawing. I don't want to take it. Silence. His pen started moving again. She kept drawing. Neither of them spoke for the next 2 hours. But somewhere in that silence something shifted in the studio. Something that had not been there the day before and would not go away after. She felt him aware of her in a way that was different from an employer being aware of an employee. She told herself she was imagining it. He was not imagining it. Her phone buzzed at 11 p.m. Not Taejun this time. A message from an unknown number. This is Lim Chai-rin. I know who you are. I think we need to meet. I know things about your husband that you don't. Things that are worse than what you already found. Obioma stared at the screen. Her hands had gone completely still over the drafting table. Across the studio, Ryu Seo-an looked up from his work. He saw her face. He set his pen down. Obioma. She looked at him across the studio. This cold, precise, impossible man who had not learned her name for 3 days and had gotten her syllables exactly right when he finally did. She held up her phone. He crossed the studio without being asked. Read the message. His jaw tightened. Do you know who this is? His voice was very quiet. Yes. Her own voice came out hollow. She is my husband's other wife. The studio was completely silent. Seo-an looked at the message for a long moment. Then at her face. Then back at the message. Don't meet her alone. He said it with the same certainty he gave to structural decisions. Like he had already assessed the load and made the calculation. I mean it. She looked at him. This man who owed her nothing. Who had hired her to manage his schedule and find missing files and stay out of his way. Who had not asked her a single personal question in 8 days. Who had just put down his pen at 11 p.m. and crossed his studio because her face changed. Why do you care? She asked it quietly. Genuinely. He held her gaze for a long moment. Said nothing. Which was its own answer. She looked back at the message on her screen. Lim Chai-rin was waiting. And whatever she knew about Oh Taejun was worse than what Obioma already found in that drawer. Chapter 2. Chai-rin was already at the table when Obioma arrived. Small. Elegant. The kind of Korean beauty that looked like it had been maintained carefully and expensively. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. Her eyes found Obioma the moment she walked through the door and did not look away. Obioma sat down across from her. Neither of them spoke immediately. 2 women in a Seoul coffee shop on a Wednesday morning looking at the face of the person their husband had chosen simultaneously. The absurdity of it sat between them like a third presence. You are more beautiful than your photographs, Chai-rin said it without warmth. Simply. Like noting a structural detail. He showed you photographs. He showed me everything. Something moved across her face. That was how he controlled it. Showing me just enough that I felt informed. Never enough that I understood the full shape of what he had built. Obioma looked at her carefully. How long have you known about me? 8 months. Chai-rin set her cup down. I found your name in his phone. He told me you were a business contact. A Nigerian architect he had worked with before moving to Seoul. She paused. I believed him for 6 months. What changed? I got pregnant. The coffee shop noise continued around them. Someone laughed at a nearby table. A barista called out an order. The ordinary world moving through its ordinary morning completely unaware. Obioma kept her face still. You have a child. I lost it, Chai-rin said it cleanly. Without performance. The specific flatness of a woman who had already done her breaking in private. 4 months. The stress, the doctor said. They asked about my home environment. Her eyes came up to Obioma's. I started asking different questions after that. I'm sorry, Obioma said it and meant it. Chai-rin looked at her for a moment. Like she was deciding something. I don't want your sympathy. I want you to understand what kind of man we are both dealing with. Tell me. Chai-rin opened her bag. Placed a folder on the table between them. He has done this before. She said it quietly. Not just us. There is a woman in Busan. Korean. Married to him for 2 years before you. Divorced quietly. An NDA signed. Money paid. She paused. There is a woman in Lagos. Nigerian. Before all of us. She disappeared from public record entirely after their relationship ended. I have not been able to find out what happened to her. Obioma stared at the folder. He collects women. Chai-rin's voice was precise and cold and devastated underneath both. Specifically women who have something he wants. The woman in Busan had family connections to a construction licensing board. I have family connections to the Korean Architectural Regulatory Committee. You, she stopped. Me. Obioma looked up. You had a British architecture license and connections to 3 West African development firms he was trying to access. Chai-rin held her gaze. He married you for your professional network. When he had extracted what he needed, he began the process of making you professionally invisible so you would be dependent entirely on him. The coffee shop tilted slightly. She thought about the reasonable suggestions. Family first. Seoul is expensive. You can always go back to it later. She thought about the clients who had stopped calling. The firm in Abuja that had gone quiet after she moved to Seoul. The professional contacts that had slowly disconnected in ways she had attributed to distance and time zones and the natural drift of relocation. Not natural. Engineered. He told people I had retired. Chai-rin slid a printed email across the table. This is a message he sent to the director of the West African Development Architecture Consortium 14 months ago. Using your email address. Your name. Telling them you were withdrawing from professional practice to focus on family. Obioma picked up the email. Her name. Her signature. Her email address. Words she had never written. Her hands were shaking for the first time since the morning she found the certificate. He accessed your professional accounts. Chai-rin said it carefully. I have evidence of 17 separate communications sent from your professional email over the past 3 years. All of them withdrawing you from projects. Declining opportunities. Closing doors. She paused. He did not just take your career, Obioma. He buried it while you were standing right there. The email in her hands blurred. She set it down. Pressed both palms flat against the table. Why are you telling me this? Her voice came out steadier than anything inside her felt. What do you want? I want him destroyed. Chai-rin said it simply. Professionally. Wiggly. Completely. Her eyes were dry and certain. He has done this to at least 4 women. He will do it again. I have been building a case for 8 months and I need a co-complainant. Someone whose testimony corroborates the pattern. She looked at Obioma directly. I need you. Obioma looked at the folder between them. At the email with her name on it. At this woman across the table who had also lost a child and a marriage and pieces of herself to the same man in the same methodical, systematic way. Give me 3 days. She said it quietly. Chai-rin nodded once. He picked up her bag. Said. Looked at Obioma one final moment. He is going to come for you. She said it without drama. Just fact. When he realizes you are not coming back and that I have contacted you, he is going to come for you. Make sure you are somewhere he cannot reach you easily. She left. Obioma sat alone at the table with the folder in front of her and 17 stolen emails and the specific weight of a woman who has just discovered that the life she thought she was living had been constructed entirely by someone else. She picked up her phone. Called the one number she had not expected to call. It rang twice. Obioma. Seo-an's voice. Even. Present. I need to not go back to where I'm staying tonight. She said it without preamble. Without explanation. Is there somewhere in the studio I can work late? Pause. Not a long one. I'll leave the access card at the front desk. His voice was completely level. Like this was a scheduling request. Like she had not just called him at noon on a Wednesday asking to hide in his building. Use the drafting table in the east corner. The light is better. She closed her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me. A pause that had something in it she could not identify. Just come. She worked until 2 a.m. Not because she had to. Because the studio was the only place in Seoul that felt like it belonged to her right now. Her hands on the drafting table. Her drawings taking shape under the better light of the east corner exactly as he had said. She did not hear him come back. She did not know he had left and returned until she heard the studio door and looked up to find Ryu Seo-an walking in at 2 a.m. with 2 containers of food from the Korean restaurant 3 blocks away that stayed open late. He set one container beside her drafting table without a word. Went to his own desk. Opened his own container. Started working. She looked at the food. At him. At the food again. You came back. She said it quietly. I forgot something. He said it to his drawings. She looked at his desk. At the complete absence of anything he could have forgotten. At the man who had gone home and come back at 2 a.m. with 2 containers of food from a restaurant that required a deliberate detour. She said nothing. He said nothing. They worked in silence until 3 a.m. When she finally packed up her drawings, he walked her to the building entrance without being asked and waited until she was in a taxi before going back inside. She sat in the back of the taxi watching the studio building disappear behind her. Her phone buzzed. Taejun. She turned it face down. Thought about Chirin's folder. About 17 stolen emails. About the woman in Lagos who had disappeared from public record entirely. Thought about a man who came back to his own studio at 2 a.m. with food he pretended he hadn't brought. Tomorrow she would call Chirin. Tonight she pressed her head against the taxi window and let Seoul move past her and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not safe exactly. Something adjacent to it. Something that had a name she was not ready to use yet. Chapter 3. He was already there when she arrived the next morning. This was not unusual. Ryu Seo-an was always already there. She had stopped being surprised by it in week 1. What surprised her this morning was that he was not at his drafting table. He was at hers. Standing over her drawings from last night. Not touching them. The same way she had found him that night in the hook. So, focused. Like a man who had forgotten where he was. She stopped in the doorway. Those are mine. She said it carefully. He turned. His expression was the controlled one. Almost. Something underneath it that his control was working to contain. I know. He looked back at the drawings. The load distribution on this structure. His finger moved above the paper without touching. Tracing her lines from an inch above. You've accounted for soil compression variance. She crossed the studio slowly. Stood beside him. Looked at her own work through his eyes. Most architects don't. He said it without looking up. They treat foundation load as static. You've built movement into the base. The structure breathes. Her throat tightened. It was a concept piece. She said it carefully. Deflecting. Not a real project. Why not? The question landed too simply. She did not have a simple answer. Because I'm your assistant. She reached past him and gathered the drawings deliberately. Not your architect. His hand came down flat on the drafting table beside hers. Not blocking her. Just there. Close enough that she was aware of every centimeter between his hand and hers. Sit down. He said it quietly. She looked at him. Sit down, Obioma. She sat. He pulled the chair from his own desk and placed it across from her. Sat with his elbows on his knees. His dark eyes on her face with a directness that had nothing managed about it this morning. Tell me about your training. That is not relevant too. Tell me. Not a demand. Something more difficult than a demand. A request from a man who did not make them. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she told him. University of Lagos. Top of her graduating class. A scholarship to continue in London that she had declined because Taejun's opportunity in Seoul had come at the same time and she had chosen him. The professor who had written her a letter of recommendation so strong she still had it memorized word for word. The 3 firms that had offered her positions before she moved to Seoul and told them she was pursuing different opportunities. Different opportunities. What she had actually been pursuing was a marriage to a man who was building a different life with a different woman while she decorated his apartment and learned his language and made herself smaller, one reasonable suggestion at a time. Seo-an listened without interrupting. When she finished, the studio was quiet. The London scholarship. His voice was careful. Which program? She told him. Something moved across his face. I taught a masterclass there. 4 years ago. She stared at him. I know. I attended it. The words came out before she finished deciding to say them. You spoke about negative space as primary structure. About the absence being the design, not the presence. She stopped. It was the best architectural lecture I have ever attended. He looked at her. A long moment of looking at her. You were in that room. He said it slowly. Like he was placing something. 3rd row. Left side. His expression did something she had not seen it do before. Not the almost smile. Something more complicated and less controlled than that. I remember a question from that session. His voice was very quiet. About whether a building could be designed to resist its own obsolescence. Whether architecture could be built to grow rather than age. He held her gaze. That question changed 3 of my subsequent projects. Her heart was doing something unreasonable. I asked that question. She said it barely above a whisper. The studio held its breath. Ryu Seo-an looked at her across the drafting table with an expression that had stopped being professional approximately 30 seconds ago, and they both knew it. I know. He said it simply. I know it was you. I remembered the moment I saw your drawings last night. She could not speak. You should not be managing my schedule. His voice was low, direct. You should be building. I don't have. I am offering you a project. He cut through it cleanly. A real one. A residential commission that came in last week. The client wants something that breathes. Those were his exact words. His eyes held hers. I think you know what that means better than anyone in this studio. She stared at him. You would be lead architect. He said it like it was already decided. I would consult. The credit would be yours entirely. Why? The word came out raw. Why would you do that? He was quiet for a moment. Looked at her drawings on the table between them. Because 7 years ago in a lecture room in London someone asked me a question that was better than anything I had thought of. His voice was even. And I spent 4 years wondering what that person would build if someone gave them the space to build it. He looked up. Now I know who asked it. And I intend to find out. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were doing something she refused to let finish. This changes our professional dynamic. She said it carefully. Yes. You are still my employer. Yes. And she stopped. The word sat in her throat. Your engagement. Something shifted in his expression. Quick and complicated and then contained again. Is not your concern. He said it. Then stopped. Like he heard how that sounded. I know what you mean. She looked at the drawings between them. At her own work looking back at her. Something that had survived 7 years of being told it did not matter anymore. I'll take the project. He nodded once. Returned his chair to his desk. Picked up his pen. Professional distance reconstructed in approximately 15 seconds. Except that it wasn't. Because they had just said things to each other that professional distance had no architecture for. At 11 that morning, Oh Tae-jun walked into the studio. Not called. Not announced. Simply walked in the way he walked into everything. With the ease of a man who had never been told his presence was unwelcome. Obioma was at her drafting table when she heard his voice at the front desk. Her hands stopped moving. Across the studio, Seo-an looked up from his work. His eyes found hers immediately. She stood. Tae-jun appeared in the studio doorway. He saw her and his expression shifted into something practiced and warm and entirely false. Obi. He said her name the way he always said it. Familiar. The voice that had worked on her for 7 years. She said nothing. His eyes moved around the studio. Taking it in. Landing on Seo-an at his drafting table. Taking him in. I need 5 minutes. He said it to her. That's all. You don't have 5 minutes. Seo-an's voice came from across the studio. Even. Unhurried. He had not looked up from his work. She's in the middle of a project briefing. Tae-jun looked at him. I'm sorry. Who are you? Her employer. Seo-an set his pen down. Looked up. His dark eyes moving to Tae-jun with the calm assessment of a man who had already taken the full measure of what he was looking at and found it structurally unsound. And you are in my studio without an appointment. Which means you are leaving. This is between me and my wife. Your wife. Seo-an stood. Fully. Completely. The full height of him filling the studio in a way that had nothing aggressive about it and everything certain. Is an architect I have just commissioned for a significant project. He came around his desk. Whatever she is to you outside this building is irrelevant inside it. Tae-jun's jaw tightened. His eyes cut to Obioma. He saw it. The calculation she now recognized. The rapid assessment of leverage. Of what he had left to use. Of whether the Visa card was still playable. Of whether her professional isolation was still complete enough that walking away from this studio meant walking away from everything. What he did not know. What he could not have known standing in that doorway. Was that last night Obioma had emailed Chai-rin. And this morning before Seo-an arrived she had called the architectural consortium in Abuja. Told them the emails withdrawing her from their projects had been sent without her knowledge or consent. Sent them evidence. started the process of reclaiming every door that had been quietly closed in her name. She was not the woman he had left in that bedroom 8 days ago. She had only been gone 8 days. But she had been becoming someone else for much longer than that. You should go, Tae-jun. She said it quietly. I mean it this time. Something shifted in his face. Not the calculation this time. Something older and uglier underneath it. This isn't over, Obi. Mr. O. Seo-an was beside her now. She had not heard him move. He was simply suddenly there. Between her and the doorway. Between her and the man in it. His voice completely level. I will not say it again. Tae-jun looked at them both. His eyes moved to the space between her and Seo-an. To the way Seo-an was standing without touching her but with the full weight of his presence directed entirely at her protection. Something moved across Tae-jun's face. Recognition. And underneath it something that looked almost like fear. He left. The studio door closed. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Obioma exhaled. Long and slow and completely. Thank you. She said it to the closed door. Stop thanking me. Seo-an turned back to his desk. Picked up his pen. Get back to the project briefing. She looked at the side of his face. At the jaw that was still slightly tight. At the hand holding the pen that had not quite settled back into its usual steadiness. She went back to her drafting table. Picked up her pencil. Drew. Across the studio Seo-an worked in silence. But his eyes came to her 3 times in the next hour. He counted. She told herself she had not counted. At 6 p.m. her phone rang. Chiron. She answered immediately. He knows we met. Chiron's voice was controlled but something underneath it was not. He called me an hour ago. He knows. Obioma's hand tightened around the phone. What did he say? He said if I continue he will expose information about my family's business dealings that will destroy my father. Pause. He has been collecting leverage on everyone around him for years. That is how he operates. That is how he keeps people quiet. Is the information real? Some of it. Chiron's voice dropped. Obioma, he is not just a man who married 2 women. The more I dig the worse it becomes. The woman in Lagos. I found her. A pause that had weight in it. She didn't just disappear from public record. She disappeared completely. Nobody has seen or heard from her in 3 years. The studio went very quiet around her. What are you saying? Her voice came out barely above a sound. I'm saying we need to move faster than I planned. Chiron said it directly. And I'm saying be careful. Be very careful. The call ended. Obioma sat at her drafting table with her phone in her hand and the specific cold that comes not from temperature but from understanding. Across the studio Ryu Seo-an had gone completely still. He had heard enough. His eyes came to hers across the studio. Tell me. 2 words. Quiet and absolute. She looked at him. At this cold, precise man who had come back to his own studio at 2 a.m. with food. Who had remembered a question she asked in a lecture room 7 years ago. Who had stood in a doorway this morning like a load-bearing wall and made her feel for the first time in 8 days that the ground under her feet was solid. She told him everything. Folder. The 17 emails. The woman in Busan. The woman in Lagos who had not been seen in 3 years. He listened without moving. When she finished the studio was completely silent. Seo-an set his pen down. Sid. Crossed to her drafting table and stopped in front of her. His expression was not the controlled one. It was something underneath the controlled one. Something that had decided. You are not staying at your friend's apartment tonight. His voice was quiet and left no room for argument. Or any night until this is resolved. She stared at him. Seo-an. I have a building. His jaw was tight. A residential property I own in Yongsan. It is empty. It is secure. You will stay there. I cannot accept. It is not charity. His eyes held hers with the directness she had come to understand was simply how he looked at things he had decided were important. It is a practical decision. The man you married has made a woman disappear. You will not be the next one. Pause. I will not allow it. The studio held its breath. She looked at him. At the certainty in his face. At the thing underneath the certainty that neither of them was naming yet. You are engaged. She said it quietly. Like a reminder. For both of them. His jaw tightened. Something moved through his expression. Complex and old and not entirely comfortable to look at. Yes. He said it. And then said nothing else. Which was its own answer. Which was the most complicated answer he could have given. She looked at her drawings on the table between them. At the project he had handed her this morning. At the life she was building from nothing in this studio while the life she had thought she was living collapsed behind her. Okay. She said it quietly. I'll stay. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile. Something more significant than a smile. He turned back to his desk. She turned back to her drawings. Outside Seoul moved through its evening completely unaware that inside one studio two people were building something that had nothing to do with architecture and everything to do with the specific danger of being truly seen by the wrong person at exactly the right time. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Not Taejun. Not Chai-rin. A photograph. Her. Entering this building this morning. And one line beneath it. I know where you are. He thought the studio was the safest place in Seoul. He was wrong. Part 2 dropping soon. Don't forget to turn on the notification button.